Does appealing a grade reflect negatively on my transcript or status as a student at all?
Absolutely not. In fact, it doesn't appear in the transcript.
Today, we're welcoming Mary Saudelli to discuss appealing a final grade. Thanks for joining us today, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
So Mary, can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your position on campus?
Sure. My title is Associate Dean in the Faculty of Education, Community, and Human Development. So I have been here for almost 6 years. And in my role, I work a lot with faculty in relation to faculty development, tenure and promotion processes, teaching, learning, course reviews, any of those kind of elements. But another part of my role is grade appeal and student complaints and following the instructor responsibilities policies, accessibility, student misconduct, academic misconduct of any kind. All of those areas fall within my portfolio, in addition to indigenization and ensuring that we're constantly thinking about decolonization and reconciliation, and answering the Truth and Reconciliation calls for action.
That's great. Well, it sounds like you're the perfect person to talk about grade appeals today. So what is the grade appeal process and what is it for?
Okay. So the purpose of a grade appeal is because UFE is feels it's very important to acknowledge that students have rights with respect to their grades. And part of their rights is to ensure that they have a fair grading process. So the mechanism to ensure that is the grade appeal policy. And it's a very specific policy that you can access. Anybody can access it. It's an open source document right on the UFE website. In addition, there's a grade appeal procedures document that goes with it. So it's good to access both to understand how they work together. And certainly as a student, it's really important to understand what the steps are. So that's the purpose of it. The process of a grade appeal is somewhat involved. It's all detailed on the UFE Grade Appeal website, but it's a process that usually begins at the end of a final grade, because it's important to understand when a student appeals their grade, they're appealing their entire grade for the course, not just one assignment.
Good to know. And who can appeal a final grade?
Okay, any student who's in a graded course can appeal a final grade. But they have to do it before convocation. So you can't graduate and then come back 3 years later and do a grade appeal. Doesn't work that way. The other element to consider is it's not for addressing things like instructor complaints or some other aspect of a circumstance that can happen in relation to their learning journey. It's specific to the grades in a course. So that's the design, or that's what the grade appeal process is designed for.
Okay. And what is the process for appealing a grade?
So the first thing that I would say to anybody is access the website and make sure you've read through the grade appeal policy, because there's 4 criteria upon which a student can appeal a grade. You can't just appeal a grade because you don't like the grade. I think everybody would say that, right? The number's never the right number, right? Compared to the work we do. You have to meet one of those 4 criteria. And they're outlined right on the website and also in the grade appeal policy. The second step is to meet with your instructor first and try and resolve it that way in a one-on-one meeting. That step is actually outlined in the policy as well. The next step is, if you aren't able to resolve it directly with the instructor, then you go to the website and there's a form that you complete that outlines why you're appealing the grade and why you think it was unfair. And it's important for the student to understand that that document they complete, they will file it with the registrar, but the instructor has the opportunity to respond to that. And that gets filed with the registrar as well. And then both of those documents will come to the dean's office. And the dean's office role at that stage is to attempt to resolve the conflict or resolve the grade appeal dissonance, if you will. That may be in the form of a meeting with the student and or a meeting with the professor. Often it resolves at that stage. So I would say about 95% of the grade appeals that come to my attention get resolved in the grade appeal resolution meeting. It's important to note that if at that meeting, if it doesn't resolve, then there's another process that can happen upon student request. And that has to be done at the registrar's office with the student. Then what will happen after the grade appeal resolution meeting is the dean's office will inform the registrar that either the matter resolved or it did not resolve. And if it did not resolve, then the student has a right to file it to go one step further, which is kind of like a hearing, although I don't like to call it that. And what will happen is the dean's office will receive word that we're to assemble a committee. And that committee is made up of an instructor in the discipline, an instructor that can be in the discipline or outside the discipline, and somebody and a student. So we often contact SUS, the student union, to have a student representation. That part of the process, what happens is we ask that it be confidential in terms of who the student is that is appealing their grade, because we don't want there to be a situation where there's bias. All of the information, though, is shared with that committee. They usually have a meeting with me first, and I outline the parameters of their role. And they can review all the documents. They can meet with the student and or the professor, and then they provide a reasoning, a decision based on whether the grade stands as it is, changes in some fashion, and they provide the rationale. That is shared with the student and the instructor, and it's filed with the grade appeals process.
Okay, thank you.
And it's a long process.
Yeah. And it's nice that most of these issues can get resolved at the resolution meeting without taking it to that level.
Yeah.
When trying to appeal a final grade, does the onus of proof fall on the student or on the faculty member?
It actually falls on both, right? Because it's considered a process where the dean's office at that stage is sort of that mediator, is that office that's coming in. The dean's office doesn't have a vested interest in terms of the instructor, doesn't have a vested interest in terms of the student and their grade. What they're looking at is the details of the situation. They're looking to see if there's been a breach of the instructor responsibilities policy. They're looking to see if there's some sort of miscommunication or extenuating circumstances as well. Certainly the past few years, we've been living in a world of extenuating circumstances. And, to a certain degree, there's a common sense factor here that has an impact on student grading. Extenuating factors do happen, and that's part of that dialogue. So that's why I say neither one really have onus and both have onus. It's let's understand the holistics of the situation and see if we can resolve it.
That's good to know. Does appealing a grade reflect negatively on my transcript or status as a student at all?
Absolutely not. In fact, it doesn't appear in the transcript. It's part of a student right to ensure that if they feel that they've had their grade compromised, that they can have that reviewed in a very open and transparent way. So there's no negative impact on the student whatsoever.
That's good. What is the mindset a student should come into the grade appeal process with?
Okay. So it's important to understand that it's not an adversarial process. It's a diplomatic conversation. It's nothing to be afraid of. Sometimes a student might be afraid, or sometimes they might be angry about a set of circumstances. And they may even have a right to be angry, depending on what's going on. But it's really important to come to that process with an understanding that it's going to be a dialogue. It's going to be an opportunity to share their perspective and to hear the faculty member's perspective and see if we can come to a meeting of the minds. It's not adversarial, it's community-based. It's community-oriented.
That's great. That's a good mindset that we have towards that.
Yeah. Makes a big difference.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for interviewing with us today, Mary, and for giving us some clarity on the grade appeal process. If you're looking for more information on policy, feel free to check out our Know Your Rights website.